All opinions and quotations in no way represent Riverwest Radio and are the sole responsibility of the producer, guests, and callers. Riverwest Radio is not liable for any legal issues arising from the content of this program.
Ugly, misformed little creature who has no purpose here. You are obsolete, Mr. Wordsworth. You have no function, Mr. Wordsworth. You're an anachronism, like a ghost from another time.
I am nothing more than a reminder to you that you cannot destroy truth.
You're a bug, Mr. Wordsworth, a crawling insect. An ugly, misformed little creature who has no purpose here, no meaning.
I am a human being. I exist. And if I speak one thought out loud, that thought exists, even after I'm shoveled into my grave.
Delusions, Mr. Wordsworth. Delusions, the Bible, poetry, essays, all kinds, all of it illuminate to make you think you have a strength when you have no strength at all. You have nothing but spindly limbs and a dream, and the state has no use for your kind.
Yeah? Well, we're going to have to do something about that. This is RiverwestRadio.com, community-supported radio, streaming live from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm your host. My name is Michael Wordsworth, and welcome to Breaking Down the News, the show that presents the news highlights of the week, but with a twist. Breaking Down the News is more concerned in bringing you information that wasn't covered on the front pages. Headlines you don't want to miss, because not listening could be dangerous to your freedom, liberty, and health.
And good afternoon. I'm Michael Wordsworth with Wordsworth Listening To. Today's episode is incredibly exciting. We have Dr. Paul Connett for an interview today. It's June 4th, May 2012. Welcome. Today's topic, fluoridation in Milwaukee's water, fluoridation across the country. The case against fluoridation is based on scientific facts, while the only argument supporting fluorosilicic acid being added to our drinking water comes from fanatical propaganda writers and the poor minds that subscribe to this massive lie. The fluoridation issue can be broken down into one simple question, and that question is this. Will we continue to believe that a toxic sedative that attacks every cell and organ in the body is beneficial to teeth? I'm very proud to present our guest on today's show. Dr. Connett supported Alderman Bull last week when together they confronted the opposition at City Hall. Dr. Paul Connett is a graduate of Cambridge University and holds a PhD in chemistry from Dartmouth College. Since 1983, he taught chemistry at St. Lawrence University in Canton, New York, where he specialized in environmental chemistry and toxicology. He is retired since May 2006, but over the past 27 years, his research on waste management has taken him to 49 states in the U.S. and 50 other countries, where he has given over 2,000 pro bono public presentations. Ralph Nader himself said of Paul Connett, he's the only person I know who can make waste interesting. Dr. Connett is the leading expert on this topic, the leading expert in the nation, if not the world, and we at Riverwest Radio are very proud to have him here. Welcome, Dr. Paul Connett.
Well, thank you, Michael. Thank you for having me on the program.
Yes, sir. We are anxious to hear what you have to say in Milwaukee. We'd like to, so many people wanted to pass on their appreciation and thanks to you for showing up personally at our City Hall and assisting Alderman Bull in this great crusade.
Well, I was happy to do it, and I was happy to be part of a pretty heavy-hitting threesome with Dr. Bill Osmondson, a dentist from Oregon who I've worked with for a number of years, and more recently Dr. Yolanda White, a pediatrician from Atlanta, Georgia. So between the three of us, a dentist, a doctor, pediatrician, and a scientist, I think we hit quite a number of bases.
Indeed, the Milwaukee Journal didn't do a very good job of giving you coverage, though. I'm sure you read the article that Alderman Bull wrote. Very, very good.
Yeah, I thought his article was excellent. I thought the coverage of the hearing was pretty good, but I was very disappointed with the editorial, especially describing my evidence as anecdotal. I find it extraordinary that you can do 16 years of research on an issue and publish a book with two other scientists with every single argument backed up with references to the scientific literature, and then have journalists who've, I don't know how long they've studied the issue, but to dismiss my evidence as anecdotal, when a great deal of the information that supports fluoridation, unfortunately, is anecdotal from dentists. It was a bit of a shock and a disappointment. I think that's rather superficial judgment on their part, and it didn't serve the citizens of Milwaukee very well. But other things have been good. I think the TV coverage was fairly good, and as I said, the article was fairly good, and Jim Bowles' leadership in this issue, plus that editorial of his own, was excellent.
Well, clearly they were attempting to minimize you and the issue by merely blowing this off as anecdotal. But one thing I thought was interesting was the opinion article written by the Milwaukee Journal that was against Alderman Bowles' position. It had no authorship. I looked all over the page, and I could not find one person to stand behind what they were saying. It was just this collective, we do not accept the current opposition, and we think that it's safe. And they did mention, though, that you showed up with a binder with 2.5 inches thick worth of material, and I thought that, wait, is that supposed to be against him? Because the reason you showed up with that binder was you could. There's that much documented evidence. I'm sure you could have showed up with a 2-foot thick folder.
Yeah, I just wish, Michael, that at some point we had a judge and jury on this that would allow full presentations, maybe a day each, from both sides, and an examination of the references they bring to bear, and then make a judgment. But we have no judge and jury in this country on issues like this. I'm afraid all the regulatory agencies on this matter are asleep. The FDA has never regulated fluoride for ingestion, and stand by while over 180 million Americans each day are being given this medicine, which they refuse to regulate. We have the EPA has now spent 6 years and is yet to lower the safe drinking water standard for fluoride, which is currently set at 4 parts per million, even though they paid the National Research Council to review the literature, and the National Research Council, for once a balanced panel, did an excellent job and came back and said the current safe drinking water standard is not protective of health and needs to be lowered, and you need to do a health risk assessment. As I say, 6 years later, they still haven't completed that. And meanwhile, we have the CDC having full reign to run around the country promoting fluoridation, everybody thinking that it's the full big 20,000 people or whatever the number of employees are of this huge federal agency down in Atlanta, Georgia. And making statements as if it was the full agency, when in fact the only entity that is aggressively promoting this practice in the United States is the Oral Health Division of the CDC, which is only 30 people. And really? They are dentally trained, not medically trained. They don't have amongst them any certification in toxicology or specialized areas of medicine. And yet they're telling the country that fluoridation is one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century. And unfortunately, that's where most people stop. If you get a superficial treatment by a journalist or a politician or a health spokesperson, and they simply quote one sentence from each side, and the quote from the pro-fluoridation side is the Center for Disease Control says that fluoridation is one of the top 10 public health achievements of the 20th century, without probing any further. And then the quote from the other side is Congressman this or Mrs. Clutterbuck or Professor this says, one sentence.
Right.
They think that's that's good journalism. Of course, it isn't good journalism. They should got to go below the surface. And I've got to admit, I've got to plead guilty here, Michael, because
Really?
16 years ago, I was walking around thinking that the people opposed to fluoridation are a bunch of flakes, flat Earth society, crazy people like Dr. Strangelove in that movie.
I see.
And that there's nothing wrong with fluoridation, and everybody says it's okay, blah, 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 blah. And then my wife, one afternoon, persuaded me to actually read a few scientific articles, and I was absolutely shocked and, of course, embarrassed that I, as a scientist, had been walking around, A, thinking that this was perfectly safe, and B, thinking that the people opposed to fluoridation were Looney Tunes. It was very embarrassing. And, you know, one has tried to apologize ever since for those scientists out there long before I came along who fought to get common sense and good science to prevail against very powerful political entities like the U.S. government.
But, sir,
this issue.
What was it that made you, many people, I mean, very few people have your background in toxicology, but other dentists, other doctors surely have looked into this issue. What was it that made you not turn tail and run? How did you find the courage to face this horrible lie and take action?
Well, first of all, of course, I was apprehensive because I knew enough to realize that if I came out against fluoridation, I would be stigmatized.
Indeed.
I would be immediately perceived as being Looney Tunes myself. And so I wasn't anxious to do it. But when I started reading the literature, I must say that what I thought had happened with nothing to back it up. But what I thought had happened is that those poor, crazy anti-fluoridation people had confused the element fluorine with the compound fluoride. Now, when elements combine, they form compounds. Now, in the case of fluorine, you're dealing with the most reactive, the most aggressive element in the periodic table. And if someone was putting that in the water, it would be ridiculous. But fluoride, I thought, well, that's the equivalent to sodium chloride. Compare that with chlorine. Everybody knows that chlorine is a very reactive gas, a very poisonous gas, used in World War I to actually kill people.
Well, now,
on the one hand, you've got chlorine, the nasty, aggressive element, and on the other hand, when it combines with another element to form a compound, that compound is pretty benign, i.e. sodium chloride, common salt.
I see. Yes, sodium chloride.
But the thing with the fluoride is that whilst it is unreactive chemically, it is extremely active biologically.
Indeed.
And that's when I got alarmed. When I saw the biochemistry of fluoride, when I saw that fluoride inhibited enzymes, when I saw that fluoride interfered with G proteins, which are very important in getting messages across membranes, when I saw that it interacted with all the metal ions that we need to do good things in the body, when I saw it was interfering with hydrogen bonds, which are at the heart of the functioning of biochemistry, I became alarmed. And in fact, you know, there's an interesting bit of history here. Wisconsin was one of the early battlegrounds for fluoridation.
Really?
In the 50s. Yes, you had two very aggressive dentists. One was a guy called Frisch, who went around to each community of Wisconsin pushing fluoridation. And you had Frank Bull, who was the dental director of Wisconsin at the time, and he was also equally aggressive, pushing fluoridation, and was one of the people that twisted the arm of the U.S. Public Health Service to endorse fluoridation in 1950.
Well, now
which is a peculiar thing to do since none of the trials have been completed, but that's another story.
But who's
so here you have these aggressive dentists and regulators pushing fluoridation in Wisconsin. The first opponents were biochemists at the University of Wisconsin in Madison. They were opposed to fluoridation because they knew that fluoride was being used in biochemical experiments at that time to inhibit enzymes. And they felt it was crazy, like I do now, to introduce this stuff into the human body.
Indeed.
And I should say this, speaking from a biochemical point of view, fluoridation is sheer lunacy. It just doesn't make sense. First of all, there's not one single biological or biochemical process in the human body that needs fluoride.
Not one.
Digest that for a moment. There's not one process in the body that needs fluoride to function. Okay, where we can function completely well without fluoride. You can have perfectly good teeth without fluoride. Nobody has ever shown that fluoride is an essential nutrient, that we need to swallow it to do something for our baby's development or our development or anybody's development. None. On the other hand, there are many, as I've already indicated, there are many processes in the body that are harmed by fluoride, given a sufficient concentration. Now, we could argue till the cows come home between the two sides as to whether we reach those concentrations that cause harm. I believe that we do, but the pros do not. But that's a separate argument. I mean, just look at it and take it at its face value. You don't need to swallow fluoride. It doesn't do any good to swallow fluoride.
What about topically?
Even the promoters now admit that it works topically. It works on the surface of the teeth, not from inside the body, but on the surface of the teeth. And at that point, anybody with an ounce of common sense should surely say, look, if it works on the outside of the teeth, and we've got fluoridated toothpaste, brush it on your teeth and spit out this toxic substance. This way, you solve both the medical problem and the ethical problem. You solve the medical problem because you avoid exposing every tissue in the body to this toxic substance, and you solve the ethical problem because you're not being forced to force a medicine on people that don't want it. By now, there are probably several hundred, maybe several thousand people in Milwaukee who have started to read the literature, started to go to our webpage, fluoridealert.org. There may be one or two that have even read our book, The Case Against Fluoride, and have decided that they don't want it. But this government, at the moment, is saying, no, you've got to have it, and thereby violating a very important medical principle, which is the principle that a patient needs informed consent before they accept medication. You cannot force medication on an individual. A doctor cannot. So what is happening in Milwaukee and hundreds of other cities in the United States, but very few cities around the world, there's only a few countries that fluoridate, but in those countries that do, you're allowing governments to do to everyone what a doctor can do to no one, namely force medication on them. And they say, oh, we're not forcing it on anybody. You're not forced to drink the water. Wait a moment. If you're in low income, you are certainly forced to drink the water from the tap. You don't have enough money if you're on a low income to get reverse osmosis or distill your water or buy bottled water for everything that you need. And that's particularly alarming when we're talking about bottle feeding babies.
Did you say that fluoride is classified now as a medicine by the FDA or ADA?
Well, they play semantics. The simple fact is the definition of a medicine in most places is a substance used to prevent or treat disease.
Yes.
Well, the purpose of fluoridation is to treat and prevent dental decay. So the moment that is stated as a purpose, then there's no question that fluoride is being used as a medicine, and the public water supply is now being used to deliver medication, and therefore it is.
The FDA never approved it, correct?
No, the FDA has never approved fluoridation. They shunted that off to the EPA, but the EPA only regulates contaminants, not additives.
Right, it has to kill you for them to regulate
additive.
it. It has to be toxic in order for the FDA to actually regulate something, correct? The substance itself has to be toxic.
FDA is supposed to be regulating drugs. FDA is supposed to be regulating drugs. Anything that's used to treat medicine or any medical practice is regulated by the FDA. The EPA regulates contaminants, toxic substances in the drinking water, which may be there naturally, like arsenic is there often naturally, or it may be an industrial pollutant. But that's their job, to keep the water safe. They've got nothing to do with the notion of using the public water supply to deliver medicine, which is a daft idea. Think about it.
Yes.
It's a daft idea, because once you take that approach of using the public water supply to deliver medicine, there's two things you can't control. You can't control the dose. That's how much fluoride people get, because you can't control either how much water they drink or the fluoride they get from other sources.
I see, yes.
And secondly, so you can't control the dose, and the second thing is you can't control who gets it. Once you put it into the water, it goes to everybody. It means it goes to people that are very young, bottle-fed babies. It goes to infants. It goes to children. It goes to elderly people. It goes to sick people. It goes to people with poor nutrition. It goes to people with poor kidney function who can't get rid of the fluoride accumulating in their bones. So, I mean, you ask any pharmacist in the world, is there any substance used in medicine in your store that you can say to people, we don't have to control the dose of this. Take as much as you like, whenever you like. No. Drink it with every glass of water that you drink. Have some of this medicine. And secondly, you can give this to anybody. You can give this to anybody in your family, this drug.
That would never happen.
There's no other drug like that. And in fact, this is such a preposterous idea that we've never done this with any other medicine. There was, but let me back up. There was a short experiment in the 1930s where they used the public water supply to deliver iodine, because there are a lot of people with iodine deficiency.
Even today.
But the difference between iodine and fluoride is that iodine is a known nutrient, and if you don't have enough of it, you develop, goiter and the thyroid dysfunction and so on. And so there was huge justification in this particular case, but even that experiment failed because some people got too much iodine and came down with hypothyroidism. It reflects the fact that you can't control the dose. And it also reflects another thing, which is there's a huge range of sensitivity in the human population in response to any pharmacologically active substance, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, whether it's a drug or whether it's a poison. You're going to find a huge range of sensitivity in the population. And then that's another reason why you don't use the public water supply, or shouldn't, to deliver medicine.
Should it be by prescription only if this is the case? Should they require a prescription?
Absolutely. If you're talking about swallowing fluoride, first of all, no one should swallow fluoride. As I said before, it's a silly thing to do because there's no known value to swallowing it. It doesn't do any good to any process in the body, can only do harm. And if the purpose, the main predominant action of fluoride, it works topically on the teeth,
yes,
and you've got toothpaste with fluoride in it, which you can brush on your teeth and then spit it out, it makes absolutely no sense to swallow it at all. So there's no need. Look, if they did let's, for sake of argument, Michael, let's say right now that they prevailed and persuaded us that it was important for people to actually swallow fluoride.
Okay.
Not brush on the teeth, but swallow it.
Gotcha.
Now, supposing that argument prevailed, and they said, now let's discuss the best way of doing that, the best way of getting people to swallow fluoride. I would say, well, don't put it in the drinking water and distribute it willy-nilly across the population. Put it into bottles. Let's have bottled fluoridated water and make that freely available in supermarkets and pharmacies, and if necessary, make it free for people for low income. Now, this way you solve three problems. One, you can use pharmaceutical-grade fluoride if you're dealing with a much smaller quantity of fluoride that's needed, because 99% of the tap water doesn't go anywhere near anybody's teeth. It goes down the drain, washing cars and flushing the toilet, bathing and so on.
Yes, yes.
So 99% is wasted. But if you used, and you wouldn't be able to use pharmaceutical grade for fluoridating the general water supply, but you could use pharmaceutical grade if you were making up bottled water, which is what is actually happening. That is available.
Yes.
But secondly, you could also control the dose, because you could make it very, very clear. Only drink 1 liter or 1 bottle of this a day, and all the rest of the water that you drink and cook with and bathe with get from the tap, so you can control the dose.
Right.
Or you have a good shot at controlling the dose. And thirdly, you're not forcing it on people that don't want it. So if someone doesn't want to swallow fluoride, go and get it. You don't have to buy or get that bottled water from the supermarket.
You know, it's incredible. One thing I wanted to mention when you were speaking earlier is one of the reasons why they don't want to look at this, at the actual evidence, is because then the public would bring this, it would be in the light. They would be able to actually see the evidence, and it seems like the strongest case that the opposition has is to just keep this issue in the dark and let the propaganda prevail.
Yep. They've had two strategies for many, many years now. One is to win the argument with authority. And this comes through mostly with endorsements. They will give you a long list, about 100 organizations that endorse fluoridation, big ones and small ones and so on. And you're meant to be really impressed with these endorsements. I mean, if all these organizations, the World Health Organization, the CDC, et cetera,
well, right.
if they endorse fluoridation, who am I to disagree with it? So that's one strategy. And the second strategy is to absolutely ridicule opponents using the movie Dr. Strangelove, etc., to make us look like Looney Tunes. And that ridicule serves two purposes. One, it keeps people away from the issue, but also it makes dentists and doctors and scientists like myself reluctant to come out in public against it. You don't want to be insulted in this way, ridiculed in this way. Nobody likes to be embarrassed. Nobody likes to be made to look a fool in public. And they use that. So these two strategies, then, are to keep the run-of-the-mill dentists and doctors and scientists away from the literature. And the reason that fluoridation is going to end within the next few years, in my opinion, is because of Internet and because of perhaps radio programs like your own, which force the issue out, even though the mainstream media is doing a lousy job of actually investigating the issue. The science is all there now. In fact, right now, the Fluoride Action Network is translating a number of very important health studies from China in particular. China, where there's a huge amount of research going on. They don't do the research in the United States. There's very little studies done on other tissues than the teeth. All the studies are teeth. If you want to study teeth, you can get all the money in the world to study teeth, whether it's dental decay or dental fluorosis or whatever. As long as it's teeth, you can get the money to do it. But if you are interested in what fluoride does to the bones, what it does to the brains, what it does to the endocrine system, what it does to the kidney, what it does to the reproductive system, what it does to the immune system, forget it. The government agencies are not willing to fund those studies from independent people.
Well,
and if they're forced, because of certain notoriety of an issue like the cancer issue, if they're forced eventually to do some studies, what do? They give it to a dental school. They give it to a professor of dentistry who's known to be pro-fluoridation. They did this with osteosarcoma. I mean, there's a real concern here that fluoride may be causing osteosarcoma in young boys, young men.
Did that show up before?
There's been animal studies, a couple of epidemiological studies that have found this, some that haven't. So What does the NIH do? They give a lot of money to a professor of dentistry at Harvard to do a study, knowing full well that professor was very pro-fluoridation and also was a consultant for